Thank you, everyone. I'll wait for that. We can get started now. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is Teaching Economic Democracy, the sequel. Some things for today, a little bit about our last webinar, which was our first webinar in November of 2022. We focused on introducing educators in higher ed to a few organizations and examples of materials that have been created to help embed concepts of economic democracy into classes across a wide variety of disciplines. In this second webinar, we will focus on 3 examples where educators have made the long march through their internal institutional bureaucracies to create programs that center economic democracy inside of institutions of higher education. In this webinar, today we'll hear from students and faculty at 3 programs who have successfully created credentialed programs that focus explicitly on economic democracy. And our speakers will be from the Next System Studies program at George Mason University, the Advanced Certificate in Workplace Democracy and Community Ownership at CUNY, and the Economic Democracy Initiative at Bard College Open Society University Network. So first, I'll pass it over to Evan to talk a little bit about some of the context.
Great. Thanks, Giselle. Hey, everybody. My name is Evan. I am the Director of Planning and Education at BCDI, and part of the work at BCDI is thinking about economic democracy and as a project of changing institutions. And from a learning perspective, something that we've come to think about, not just us, but sort of see as value, is thinking about the role of the word of pathways. So instead of pipelines, which have other kinds of connotations, Aria, one of my colleagues, I think, who's on right now, mentioned this thing of thinking about waterways and pathways, other forms in which people travel or resources travel through a journey. And so for us, thinking about learning and economic democracy is this concept of pathway. Now, of course, pathways, as you can see from the visuals here, pathways aren't always straightforward. And so instead of just like a very straight and clear path, you can see that there are also some winding ways. And so when we think about embedding economic democracy and learning into practice, at various forms of institution, from preschool to higher education, these pathways can catch people at a lot of different moments in their life, and so we have to try to be cognizant of the social realities of these things. And so this is part of our goal, is to try to think about how do we build programming and institutions that can meet people wherever they are at in their educational and learning journeys. You can go to the next slide. And so as we think about that too, and the idea of pathways, something that's really important as a part of economic democracy as well, is that it's not just a set of information that you're trying to help, equip people with, like, the sort of that Freire quote, the filling of the filling of a bucket, right? As the educational model, the banking model, but to also think about it as a process of transforming social relationships. And this is extremely challenging. Not obviously, it's no small feat, but to keep that as a North Star and keep it in mind, that project of integrating knowledge, production and dissemination, and being in relationship with social movements is really critical, and that new forms of knowledge are created and able to be constructed when they're a part of the changing nature of social relations as well. And so this quote was really powerful, I think, as sort of helping to frame that for an economic democracy context. You can go to the next slide. And there's, for folks who were at the last webinar in November, you're probably somewhat familiar with this, of course, and the priest Arizmendi from Mondragon had a very similar approach, right? So that was about the Black freedom struggle, that quote, about SNCC really, and their pedagogy and philosophy of education. And it's very similar, almost very, very parallel, similar to the Mondragon or to the Arizmendi philosophy around the reciprocal nature of cooperativism as an economic movement that is also educational, as well as an educational movement that utilizes applied economic action. And so those mutual reinforcing relationships, it's different phrasing, but gets at the same idea, that it's about a relationship between the social domain of action and as well as about education and knowledge. You can go to the next slide. And of course, the Mondragon pathway, again, the idea of pathways, I put that little pathway image in the back, testing my PowerPoint skills to get a shaded image in the background. Their pathway, and this is out of their work in the ECOSTOLA system, which is their early childhood education, their pre-university program, which is also about pathways of learning and where they develop cooperative pedagogies from early childhood all the way through the technical and the professional, and how that builds towards then a sustainable regional and democratic economy in the Basque region. You can go to the next slide. So these quotes also for US context, for folks probably familiar with these names in the United States, Jessica Gordon-Emhart and Stacy Sutton both have written, Jessica quite extensively over the last 20 years or so about the role of education and cooperativism, not just in her book, Collective Courage, but in a series of other articles as well about different touch points of education from the community and high school level all the way through higher education, the teaching of alternative economic paradigms, and to think about the interconnections between these two, between the social and the educational. You can go to the next. And so we did some work using some of this knowledge and thinking. BCDI recently did a 2022 high school fellowship, a schools fellowship in the Bronx. We just wrapped that up in the early part of 2023. We published a case study about it on our website, as well as an article that we wrote up in NPQ. I think it was published last month, trying to help document some of this thinking around pathways, but also specifically in the high school context of how do we take all of the knowledge that exists about cooperatives and economic democracy and begin to really stitch them together, working in and with community to build really coherent and clear pathways and connections between schools and communities, so that this knowledge and these practices are embedded in culture and not just something that's brought up in the curriculum as an abstraction in the classroom. Go to the next slide. And of course, the star of the show, more than the work that we published, is the report that the young people produced themselves. And so they wrote up this, their findings and their thoughts and reflections are all available in this Canva. So that's really the sort of pièce de résistance of the entire fellowship program from 2022, was what the young people themselves created. And so that really reflecting their knowledge and their journey and their producing of, connecting their realities to how to bring economic democracy as a concept into their school and their daily lives, which I think was really one of the most important pieces of the work, was them doing that synthesis work to think about all of the different ways that democracy can be practiced, is and isn't practiced in their high school lives. And then of course, where can it be introduced as well? So it's really important and connects to our work today. So you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so our work today, if we think about this as the US pathway, we're really going to focus today on the piece here, the yellow, the sort of brightest yellow, the post-secondary and the postgraduate. So the work today, as Giselle already mentioned, we're introducing this from the perspective of thinking about, once folks have gone from high school into college and into the postgraduate, what are the ways in which we can embed this into the sort of the knowledge politics and the politics, particularly of the institutions of higher education, where getting programs built is not just a question of resources, but also, a question of doing the work to stitch it into the life of the university, and particularly to then find students, which is of course always like one of the pieces that gets asked of new programs, is where are your students going to come from? Who will be attending these programs? Who's the ideal candidate? Who's going to be interested in these things? So that's why we wanted to have some student voices as well in the space today. We can go to the next, or is that the last one? Great. Yep. So our speakers, as Giselle mentioned, Ben Mansky, Rebecca Lurie, and Jordan Ayala will, and students from their respective programs will catch us up on all these things. So the idea here is that we're learning both from the student experience as well as from the educator experience of what it takes to build these programs in at the higher education level, and then also, who are the students and the audiences that are taking advantage of them. So I think we'll stop there and transfer it over to Ben.
All right, take it away.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, will do. So it's a pleasure to spend a little bit of time with everybody here today. Normally I would have slides. I have many versions of slides presenting our work on next system studies at George Mason University, but I decided to keep it simple today. So I'll talk off the cuff and maybe use my background to share a few of the other people who are involved in what we're doing here. I am an assistant professor of public sociology in the sociology and anthropology department here at George Mason University. We were encouraged to start off by talking about how economic democracy came into our scholarship, and then to take it to an introduction to our actual work, our programs and so on, and then to talk a little bit about how, as it's been framed, our work has become embedded in this institution. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'll say that, I've only been a professor for 2.5 years. I finished my PhD in 2020. And I had 30 plus years of work prior to my doctoral research. And that work in the movement really involved using, as we said, in the Earth First movement, and as people I'm sure still say in the Earth First movement, using every tool in the toolbox. So it involved front lines direct action of all kinds, fighting the mining industry, timber industry, fighting for treaty rights in the upper Midwest, primarily in the Pacific Northwest. It involved working as a registered lobbyist in the environmental movement. It involved strikes and union organizing as a steward and active member of various unions, mostly AFT. It involved student organizing, community organizing, independent politics, all kinds of things. And also a big part of my life throughout the 1990s was my sort of day-to-day life within the cooperative sector. So I grew up primarily in Madison, Wisconsin, and we moved there from Jerusalem and Israel. So those were the sort of my two hometowns. And Madison is a place that has a very high density, perhaps the highest density of worker and community-owned institutions in the country. I haven't seen comparative studies, but I would put money down on that, whether it's local currency or US dollars or something else. And so what that meant was that I lived in a housing cooperative for 5 years, in which we not only owned all the buildings that were part of the system, but did our own labor of all kinds, childcare, cooking, maintenance, you name it. I drove cab for Union Cab of Madison as a worker owner when I was in college, and did that off and on for 4 years. And was also involved in food cooperatives as a member, various food co-ops as a worker consumer member, pharmacy, community supported agriculture, getting that off the ground in the 1990s, all kinds of things. So in some ways, my work around economic democracy has been mostly as somebody who's lived and breathed it. And it's only recently that it's come into my scholarship. My scholarship has primarily involved social movements. I'm a social movement scholar. And I also study the way in which democracy struggles engage in constitutional change. And it's only recently, as we've been building next system studies at Mason, that I've sort of been able to integrate these more. So that's a bit of background. In terms of the work that we're doing at George Mason University, we launched officially the day before Earth Day on John Muir's birthday, April 21st, 2021, so just 2 years ago, with a big sort of announcement event with a number of people that would be familiar to many people here. And since then, we have been working to build out a program that involves coursework, various kinds of certificates, that involves engaged research in the community, and programming that is publicly facing. And also, we've worked to build our institution into a base for a much larger field of next system studies internationally. And so I'll just say a little bit more about each of those categories of work. The folks who are behind me here were the students who were enrolled in our core seminar in social change in the next system. This is our last class on Tuesday. I would have invited some students in, but we're in finals week right now. And there are also lots of these people are in the leadership of the protests against Governor Youngkin speaking at commencement in a week and a half. So they're quite busy. So I decided to leave that off. But we've offered that core seminar 3 times now, and it forms the core of a program at our Arlington campus. Mason is a very new institution. We have 5 campuses, and we're now the largest public university in the state of Virginia. So just to give you a sense of this institution, which you may not be familiar with, it's moving quickly. So our Arlington campus is the base for a fellowship program that is currently an undergrad fellowship program. We had 8 Next System Fellows last spring, and we had 8 more this spring, and we'll be offering it again next spring. And the fellowship experience involves a major internship practicum component. It involves a course in political sociology, power, politics, and society, a course in society and technology, and then our core seminar on social change in the next system. And we're working on expanding the offerings, so there'll be more electives next year. So basically what the students do is they go through an application process. We don't actually admit everybody. We want to make sure that people who are admitted are really committed to the work together. They take all the same courses together. They build really strong bonds. We've already had students who've come out of these courses who've done things like go to Jackson, Mississippi on a dime to work with Cooperation Jackson and put in work in organizing. We have one of our Next System Fellows who's heading up to Philadelphia to work with the Poor People's Army this summer. So, and a lot of our students and graduates are working with us on an ongoing basis. So we're already generating some capacity. It's really been great. We are also in the process of getting a Next System Studies minor offered at Mason. And there's other things that you could probably imagine that we're doing. So that's on the curricular side. On the research side, we have 3 engaged research projects. One of those, our primary project, is called Democratizing Nova. Nova is short for Northern Virginia. That's this region of Virginia. Traditionally, it includes the 3 counties in Northeast Virginia, which are among the most unequal and wealthiest in the United States. For us, we've expanded it out to the western border, out by West Virginia and the Shenandoah River and further south to be more inclusive. And what we've been doing with DNOVA, and I'll try to pull this up as I'm talking, is, oh, there we go. I just took my video out. There we go. Is to build a long-term project for transitioning the entire region to a post-capitalist political economy to get as far as we can go. So that's involved, first of all, building a database of Next System initiatives in the region. We have 15 categories of initiatives. So they include cooperatives, land trusts, those kinds of things, the exercise of indigenous sovereignty for a climate transition. They include alternatives to policing and war, and so on. And now that we've done that, we have over 150 initiatives that meet our selection criteria. We have done things like organize a summit. So this is an image from our DNOVA summit. You can only see some of the major panelists here from the county and from the Asian Chamber of Commerce and from Service Employees International. We had our first summit this past year, and we're working into building sort of lasting partnerships out of this process so that we can, number one, speed up conversion of existing business to worker and community ownership, driving finance to startups from our graduates and from people in various communities in this part of the state, to speed up all the kinds of sort of broadly speaking, Next System initiatives in the region. And then also develop a comprehensive plan for a transition so that, for example, if something like Build Back Better comes along in a year or two, except for with more money, we're in a position to make sure that as much of those resources goes to transformative changes in the region as possible. So we're doing that. We also have a project called the Virginia Digital Commonwealth, which is basically about building a community design digital technology process. So bringing coders and community members together to set the parameters for what a platform or a platform of platforms of cooperatives and local governance could look like, and then to actually build it. And we have a project around popular constitutionalism, which is focused not just regionally, but internationally as well. So those are our engaged research projects, all about building partnerships between us and various social movement organizations and community organizations. And our students are actively involved with all of that as interns, as project managers. And when I say students, I mean PhD students, master's students, undergraduates, and increasingly high school students from the area. Finally, we are serving as a center for building Next System studies more broadly. And it's important to state that Next System studies as a concept is something that comes out of the work of the Next System Project, which was a project of the Democracy Collaborative for a number of years. I've had an association with them, with Garl Perovitz and others for many years. And so it was natural for me when I came to Mason that I was going to work to build a center to support this larger priority of of building a field of study across all the disciplines in academia that we call Next System Studies. And just to say this, since I haven't said it yet, for us, Next System Studies involves the study of system design, so next system design, at all levels, including the global. It involves a study of system change, which is to say the pathways, as Evan was saying earlier, and historically, in terms of scholarly research, that's involved the study of revolutions or social transformation. And to that, we are adding reconstruction strategies as pathways, and we study them all, and we study them together. And then the study of systemic movements as the critical producers of knowledge about system design, about next systems, and about pathways. And we engage directly with systemic movements, and systemic movements are those parts of the larger social movement that are actually engaged in trying to change the whole darn system, right? There are some, I could get into a lot. I want to go into detail as a social movement scholar and all that, but I'll just leave that there. So that's the way in which we constructed this field at Mason, and acting as a center internationally. What we did recently was we convened this workshop on next system studies. So that's some of the folks you see behind me here. I'm guessing with Evan popping up here that I may be running on time. So I'll just say in terms of getting this embedded, it's not been difficult. I was hired to build public sociology here at Mason. There are sociology programs all over North America that pay lip service or are committed to engaged research. And so this is essentially how we've been doing it. I'm sure there'll be questions about George Mason University and the attempts by the Koch brothers to take over this institution and how that relates to us. So if you want to ask that, let's leave that for the discussion, and I look forward to that. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll go to Rebecca.
Sorry, I'm going to share my screen, and I also plan to share my 12 minutes. So just give me a second. Don't start my clock yet, till I can. But let me share screen, which is hard with making this a show. Okay, do you see the deck?
Yes.
Okay, minimize that. All right. I wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. As a forever New Yorker my whole life, this is a map that I was familiar with from a young age when I learned that we were on Lenape territory. And in 1978, I learned of this report that went to the United Nations from the Haudenosaunee people, which is in this area you can see in the north of this map, a basic call to consciousness. And this was their wampum belt that actually was their written contract of how we act cooperatively. And I want to highlight that the image, the photo, the drawing really represents, even though it looks like one person, it's one person in relationship to nature with all systems. And the basic call to consciousness to the United Nations Human Rights Commission in 1977 declared, pay attention to all these systems, please, and with justice. So I want to honor that. And then I wanted to come back to New York City, which has a continued struggle of the cooperative economics. And in 2016, the New York City Council funded cooperative development. But see here, solidarity economy going back to the Knights of Labor, the Black Panthers, Cooperative Home Care Associates, Center for Family Life, Occupy Sandy in 2012, and then 2014, when we started getting the funding from the city. And here is a celebration in front of our city hall that explains how it's government funded, community-based organization supported, and immigrant-led, really important part of our city's cooperative development system right now. And this map is a little dated, but it gives you an idea of all the different worker co-ops that were receiving services or started. And like I said, it's dated, but it gives you a sense of New York City. Also during that time, a little earlier in the 2000s, United Federation, the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops was formed in partnership with DAWI, Democracy at Work Institute, and with that, the Union Co-op Council of that federation, which I've joined very early on, and I leave up for a second if you want to join that mailing list, please go there or check in with me later. But during that time, just around the same time that co-ops were being, the New York City funding was coming forward, Democracy at Work Institute and Project Equity created a report that I thought was really important about ecosystem development. I read this report and saw that skills capacity and cooperative education, skills capacity and cooperative education were two aspects of essential and environmental factors that are required to build a strong ecosystem. And when I heard that, I was like, well, now I know what my work is. It's to build skills capacity and cooperative education. So here I am. I haven't always been here, but around the same time that this work got started in New York, I found myself at City University at the now School of Labor and Urban Studies. And as I wanted to bring this work to the school, I ended up founding something called Community and Worker Ownership Project. What I'll say is, wasn't necessarily welcomed by some who are strong in labor and said, we don't do business here. So I found it very incumbent upon me to understand, what do we mean when we don't do business here? What is it that we're doing? And I'm sorry, I just realized I'm not keeping my time. Tell me when it's about 6 minutes in, Evan, one way or another. So it was not necessarily warmly welcomed to look at business here if we're doing cooperative business, but I emphasized the cooperative and all the different ways we can be building cooperativism. And so I said, we move like water. Where there's an opening, we go for it. We were not funded. I did this as part of my job when I could, in partnership a lot. And so we've been able to do different things, but I looked at what was happening at the City University writ large, these three schools with people. So CUNY Law, Carmen Huertas Noble, and at the Community Economic Development Law Clinic, Jessica Gordon-Nembard at John Jay College, Mike Mentzer at Brooklyn College and the Grad Center, all have been doing really important work around cooperative development. Both Carmen and Jessica are in the Co-op Hall of Fame with the NCBA. And this has been important in terms of seeing what our public university, that's quite large, has some nexus of thought for cooperativism. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. I'm going to leave out too many if I try. So I'm just going to say this is some. But we started looking at, so what are the things we can do at the school? As I said, like water, wherever we are, it's training and workshops, it's designing degree programs, forming partnerships. By the way, a partnership I've had with the Bronx Co-op Development Initiative since its foundation is an example of one. Public programming and research. We did an intense research project with very few dollars, looking at all the people who were getting all the technical assistants or CBOs that were getting money from the city, to say, where is all the education and training happening in New York City and how can people access it? And it helped us really identify through a feasibility study alongside this of where our opportunities might be. And we realized that for the good pedagogy to exist, you need to have education in these three areas: knowledge, values, and skills of cooperativism. I say the political context, the heart, and how you get the work done. And this is really important, because if we only spend time in one and not all three, we're not hitting how we do this and why. So we held a conference. Evan was really influential in helping with that in 2019 with a number of players, where we had over 600 people in person at our spring conference, which actually today is another spring conference right down the hall from me on labor issues. COVID came, and we have this wonderful quote where we all were figuring out really exactly 3 years ago now, what are we going to do? So there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. And we formed something called the Cooperative Solutions Working Group, and brought people in once a month at least for a year, and ended up with this really, I think, excellent report that frames cooperativism from the angle of unions. We were then able to finish the development of this four-course certificate at the graduate level, which is what I'm going to speak about now, or really have our students speak about it even more. But what we did in this was we did it with some pilot classes, or sometimes courses that we call special topics that are not yet approved. But it was during COVID that we got this certificate fully approved. And as of this season, it's now fully approved to be online. So the school does not do too much online, except, of course, we were all forced to these past few years, but this certificate is going to be online in synchronous classes. And we're excited because people can come from around the country. There you have a moment to get your QR code if you want to know more and see more. And so again, how did we do it? Evan really asked to talk about how do we do it? It wasn't easy because, as I said, it's like we don't do business around here. And so we had to make sure we were forging an understanding that we're talking about cooperativism, and we were looking at prefiguring the world as we want it. And all of these different aspects helped us get to the space. A new associate dean started only weeks before COVID, and her experience really helped us get the paperwork through the state for all those approvals. So now I want to, maybe I'll stop sharing screen and let Leslie Kaye come on so that you can see a student of ours. And I will have 2 more slides, but I'm going to stop sharing for now. Where are we on time?
Yeah, you're about 6 minutes left.
Oh, perfect. That's exactly was my idea. Okay, so let me invite Leslie to come on and just, Leslie, do you want me to show that slide again? Featuring you at graduation? I love that.
Yeah, it's fine.
See?
Yeah, thank
Okay,
you.
so Leslie's here. Here am I. We were fortunate to have the New York Public Library as our location for the school's graduation. And Leslie's going to talk about where she is, what she got out of the program and where she is now.
Yeah, first of all, thank you to everyone here, and thank you, Rebecca, for the invitation. I think the work that's being done around here around education is very important, and I am definitely a strong advocate. My name is Leslie. I graduated from the City College of New York, more specifically the Colin Powell School. And I did a dual program. I was able to participate in 2 programs. My undergraduate work was around economics and international studies, so I completed those majors while at City College. And very interestingly enough, I was able to find an opportunity at the School of Labor and Urban Studies through one of my fellowships at City College of New York. And that certificate program was the one being led by Rebecca, and the way that it just happened, I think happened at the right time, right moment. I was sort of in this moment of trying to figure out how I could connect my interests in social justice and also economics. And what I was learning throughout my economics curriculum was that I wasn't getting a lot of the social justice perspective, right? I felt there was something missing, and I wanted to connect with movements more. And this was back when I was not familiar with worker cooperatives. I was not familiar with solidarity economy until I transitioned into my second major, which was international studies. I participated in a fellowship opportunity that led me an opportunity to work with Rebecca with the Community and Worker Ownership Project. So I was able to intern there during the pandemic, and I want to say for about a year. And really, it was that opportunity that connected me both to the School of Labor and Urban Studies and also to coursework related to solidarity economy and cooperative economics. I was able to support with workshops that were being led by Rebecca. So it just gave me a full-on introduction to the cooperative space that I had never had before. And I think along that journey, I was able to make the connection between economics and something that I had been missing, quite frankly, from my curriculum at City College, which was more focused on finance. So I continued on that path. Along the way, I was able to find an opportunity to work with the Drivers Cooperative. And this was through a field course that I was able to take while in the certificate program. So what made the field course unique, and Rebecca, let me know if you want me to say more details on this, but what made the field course unique, I would say, is that it wasn't just a class model, it was also you being paired with people in the cooperative space. And so in my particular experience, I was able to meet people that were working at the Drivers Cooperative. And part of the project that we participated in was, working on a project alongside those members of those cooperatives. That eventually turned into an opportunity for me to intern at the Drivers Cooperative and eventually transition into a full-time position after graduation. So, I think an opportunity with the certificate program for me to be able to discover that afterwards. right now I've made a shift in the workplace that I'm at right now, but I still continue to focus. Want to continue to focus on cooperatives. I'm always trying to find opportunities for me to stay embedded and continue learning about the cooperative space. So now I am I pursued an opportunity to join the Cooperative Leaders and Scholars Program. So this is a program, it's close to a year-long program with a series of workshops, lectures, in-person networking events. And it's meant for cooperators that are either involved in the space, those that are not yet involved but are looking to get involved, and then youth that are looking to make their way into the co-op space, whether that be through credit unions, worker cooperatives, right? Co-op policy. So it brings together, I would say, a large community of people that have an interest in cooperatives and the cooperative movement, and it offers an opportunity to make that space for you. So that interest would have never, come up for me, at least, or I would have never come up with the opportunity had it not been through the certificate program. I wanted to find an opportunity to stay involved, stay connected, and continue learning. And this is the space that I'm in right now. So I'm looking forward to continuing on that journey to explore my learning opportunities.
Thank you, Leslie. And I'll just put one other thing in the chat as it transitions to the next speaker. Thank you, Evan, which is an open house class we're doing on Monday night that features that idea of bringing people from the community into the class and vice versa.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Leslie. Next, we'll hear from Jordan. Oh, and I'll share the slides as well. 1 second.
And can you enable, if you can enable share screen, that would be wonderful. I think I came on later and did not get that co-host yet. Well, it's wonderful to be with you all today. It's a lot of friends I see or a couple of friends in the room, and it's been a joy to be in these conversations with you all, Evan, Rebecca, Ben, and thank you, Gisela, for making this happen today. I'm going to introduce our work at the OSUN Open Society University Network Economic Democracy Initiative, where we focus on a different entry point than the previous two professors' previous two presentations. But I still think an interesting case, and welcome your questions about how we made this happen and how it relates to this larger effort of the Open Society University Network. And then I'll bring in one of our students and now researchers with Economic Democracy Initiative, Tyler Emerson. And first I want to just do some quick introductions of myself, and then I'll throw it to Tyler, and then I'll jump in the slides. So Jordan Ayala, a visiting assistant professor in data analytics and environmental studies here at Bard, at least for the next year or so. I've been engaged in this project, the Economic Democracy Initiative, since early 2021. Where we're focusing on, where we're focusing on bringing public money, modern money theory, and participatory approaches to and discussing local implementation of, in particular, our director, Pavlina Archerneva's job guarantee model. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm Midwesterner, Chicano, from Kansas City, Missouri, from the west side of Kansas City, Missouri. Big part of who I am. Was a musician for a long time, engaged in a bit of immigrant rights work, and then really forged my relationship with related work through going down with KC Tenants, tenant union in Kansas City, Missouri, that's doing really cool things. I highly recommend you check them out and try to bring that into the classroom, into the classroom and into the way that I engage in my work on the participatory side of things, so participatory action research, economist, geographer, planner. I'll throw it to Tyler, and then we'll jump in. Tyler, can you give a quick introduction of yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Tyler Emerson. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today and hear what you're all working on. It's amazing. So I was an undergraduate at Bard. I graduated in 22. I was part of the Right to Employment class, which I'll be talking about today, which was an OSUN course. My senior research at Bard was on the job guarantee, Pavlina's proposal, which Jordan mentioned, specifically as it relates to people with disabilities and their families and the communities around those people. So that's like my research area of interest. I was a student fellow with EDI, and now I'm a research assistant. And let's see what else. So I'm from Vermont, and rural Northeast Vermont. And I'm also a musician, I piano. Areas of interest for my social action, I've done things with environmentalism, waste reduction in the past, also advocacy for bone marrow transplants and donations. That's another big area of interest of mine, and Be the Match. Yeah, so that's me. We'll head into our presentation.
Thanks, Tyler. All right, so Economic Democracy Initiative is what we're here to talk about. We're going to focus on our curricular programs, a little bit of the student research as well, but other aspects include a research program, again, with students and other faculty and scholars from around the globe. Different speaker series represented here, our last keynote with Jayati Ghosh. This is a photo of our last summer workshop, which is a professional development activity within our curricular. It sits, I guess, to the side of our curricular work. So about who we are, again, our key themes and goals are democratizing money, public money for the public purpose, the modern money theory approach that Paulina is a prominent scholar within, our director at the Economic Democracy Initiative. And then again, my entry point in particular is through the planning, geography, local applied econ aspect, bringing participatory action research into our discussion of the implementation of the job guarantee model for public service employment. Founded again in late 2020, early 2021. We're situated at Bard College, but an OSUN program, an Open Society collaborative program, where we partner with various institutions within this network all across the globe, all continents. This is our team, our core team. And then of course, we have quite a few students and other researchers affiliated with us. The Open Society University Network, if you have not heard about this new effort yet, founded a couple of years ago through the Open Society Foundation funding, seeking to set up a global network, not a university, but a global network that provides some micro-credential programs, online courses, and then other conference or workshop activities where we bring together faculty designing new curricular activities around the themes of OSUN, student workshops. A really important aspect of this work has been how it grew out of the Center for Civic Engagement at Bard College, which does engage in a large amount of civic engaged research projects. Two really prominent, again, they're CCE. I should have flipped to this slide before I started chatting about them, but that's there, and it's linked here, and I'll share the slides. The Bard Center for Civic Engagement is a core partner. They're also participating in our summer workshop. And then the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College, who are doing really incredible work that I'm sure you are somewhat familiar with in this space, but who have been not yet a large formal partner, but have certainly been in idea partners in what we're up to. Really respect and appreciate the work going on there with Philip Lindsay and others. Our curricular activities are the main thing I want to introduce you all to, and then I can get into a bit about how we made this happen, but really it was facilitated by the existence of a large endowment and the Open Society University Network infrastructure, where all of the American universities, which also receive funding from the Open Society Foundation, as well as a handful of others, have come together to offer curricular programs, workshops, research opportunities across, I should know the number, something like 25 partners, potentially more. Our OSUN certificate is the most formalized aspect of our curricular activities, where we incorporate our courses. But this public policy and economic analysis certificate, a drier name, but really is an avenue for bringing in interdisciplinary perspectives on securing economic rights, on economic democracy, on unemployment and economic insecurity, with different focuses with our different partners. So our core partners are American University of Central Asia in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, Al-Quds, Bard College in Palestine, Universidad de los Andes in Colombia, and Bard College, Berlin. Within our certificate, we have 2 primary core courses. The course that Tyler will speak about in a moment, the right to employment, in partnership with 3 universities, or 3 colleges or 3 institutions, and then economic perspectives for policymaking, taking that interdisciplinary, that heterodox, as we call it in economics, approach to economic history as applied to today's policy questions. And then some work that I've led as a data analyst or a data scientist, the geographic information systems, digital mapping, in partnership with our partner at Brock University in Bangladesh. Also offering a host of online versions of these courses, where we bring together students from, often 10 or 15 different institutions and multiple continents, multiple country contexts. We offer that with the right to employment and our democratizing work course. The last thing I'll talk about before I turn it over to Tyler to wrap us up is the OSUN Summer Workshop, the professional development activity, an 8-day workshop where we engage first in understanding and bringing to the different contexts of our students, the modern money approach through public finance, public money for the public purpose, democratizing money, and then focus on as well economic policies to address economic insecurity. And now I will pass it over to Tyler, and I'll just keep the slides going. Tyler, you want to jump on in?
Yeah, thank you. All right. So I was lucky to take part in the 2021 course, The Right to Employment. And that class was really looking at securing economic rights and addressing systemic and structural barriers to those movements. So the course sort of began with a history of policies and movements for the right to employment, and then with a focus on a job guarantee. So that started, we looked at the New Deal era in the United States, but we also looked internationally at the National Rural Employment Guarantee in India or the Expanded Public Work Program in South Africa as examples. And of course, we had students from all around the world, so we were bringing those perspectives to discussion and applying economic rights to different economic contexts and how those programs can empower communities and create social value. There were readings and yeah, sorry, no, you can go ahead. So I think another special thing about this course is, it was sort of dead in the middle of the pandemic, 2021. So it was an interesting time to have both an international and, at Bard, have students in a remote course, really disrupted normal life and created a time for reflection on the status quo of our society and economic structure. The lockdowns especially, I think, created that space for visionary thinking about how public policy could create more equitable, ecologically stable, and inclusive economy. So the course really started out with, getting into the details of the history and context for the right to employment. But then the second half of the course really put students in charge of implementing a right to employment or a public service employment program in 2 cities in the Hudson Valley. We looked at Kingston and Newburgh specifically. So that process included, talking with elected officials and community leaders from organizations, in addition to dividing up the student work. And that included research on the social and economic needs, environmental needs with historical context. Some students put together the data and displayed that data with the help of Jordan as well. And then also, just the writing and presentation of that information in slideshows and in writing. So yeah, students really were in charge of that process. What programs would we want to see in those communities? And what did people from those communities think would be most beneficial? And of course, that was also at the beginning of the Biden administration and taking a look at the policies that could be put in place, civilian climate corps, and now there's the IRA and IIJA, which have some funding as well. So moving out of the course, I and other people at EDI, student fellows and others have been, taking that report and condensing it, refining it into a shorter document that could be used by policymakers, both in Newburgh or in other cities to look at what a public service employment program could look like. And that report is forthcoming. So thank you again. I really appreciated it. And if there's any questions, appreciate it.
Pass it back to you, Evan. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both. So that was really great. And we wrapped up basically right on time / early. So thank you all I've never in my life, academia or otherwise, seen a group of people on a webinar in person or online stick to the relative time frames. I'm shocked and impressed. And thankfully we're recording, so it will be known to all for all known time that this happened. So thanks for that. We are sort of open-ended. We blocked the time off until 2:30, but I don't know that we necessarily need the entirety of the half hour. I want to open it up to questions. If folks want to use the little hand raise function or type questions in the chat, I've got a bunch that I can rattle off. If there's too much dead space, I'm also happy to entertain cross what do they call it? Cross reference? No, what's the lawyer thing? Cross examination among folks who are presenting to ask each other questions as well. So yeah, if anybody's got questions from the group, we can start off there.
I'm in the quiet, I'll underscore this. Oh, Eve has her hand up. Let me stop. I was going to prompt something. Go ahead.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for the presentations, and I'm glad I got to be a part of this. I do have a question about the field work class, because this, that happens at CUNY, and we have a lot of practicums, experiential learning classes that we do within the realm of urban planning, which incorporates economic development and housing and poverty eradication. So I'm just wondering, how you went about developing the relationships with the organizations that you eventually interned with, in that fieldwork class. So how did you build those up?
I love that, Eve. So it was a very interesting evolution. And this is part of when I use the metaphor like water to see where there's an opening, because I can learn so much from you about how you do studios with organizations, and Pratt has an incredible reputation for that. And that I know that in relationship to a lot of the ways that you put your students on projects. But I didn't have that background. What I had was sort of as a fundamental organizer, I saw needs. So what happened was we're running the class spring of 2021. We promote the class as a special topics. We were not yet approved as a regular course through all the approval things you have to go through. So it's online because of COVID. And I had a number of people reach out to me and say, oh, can I take that? I can't afford it. Or can I take it? I'm nowhere nearby. Or I don't think I'd want to register for the class. But many of those people were in co-ops. So I got permission to, and I don't know if I even would have needed permission because of how everything was running, but I got permission to have a category called Project Champions, like someone auditing the class. But I made a requirement that each project champion had to come attached to a co-op or a co-op idea that they're working on. And they would bring to the class problems or circumstances that co-op is facing. And they would teach at least one thing to the class that they are proud of, what they are doing. So the exchange was you teach, but you also learn. And then they were able to read. They were not required to do any of the papers. They were required to be a strong anchor for each group. And I had 4 groups, and we had probably 7 different businesses. So we had a group formed around the garment industry, surprisingly, because that's something that just happened in New York City. And we had 3 different companies that were in the garment industry. One of them has since converted. They actually paid to put someone in the class while the owner came to the class as a project champion, and they've converted their business from privately owned to cooperatively owned. And then we had one around food co-ops and construction and transportation. So you had people who were in co-ops that might not have a number of any one of the many barriers to take a graduate level course was facing them, but they came with all the experience. So I think that welcomed open door really meant that people felt like, oh, there is no barrier for me to participate. But I couldn't do it large, we had to manage it, that number, and we want to do it again.
Thank you.
Evan asked when he set this up, there was a little bit of a conversation sort of off the record that was like, hey, Rebecca, maybe talk about how hard it was to get this thing going. CUNY is a really big institution. So I'm drawing the picture that like where nobody's looking, we go and do stuff, and then we have a reputation because we did it. Evan worked with me on this conference in 2019. That was just amazing. Got so many people recognizing like, oh my God, so much interest. It didn't bring in a ton of money, which usually is the one thing that really speaks. Oh, you get $1 million, you can start an institute doing this. So we don't have that. So instead we're doing all these other things. And I think leveraging all these other people in CUNY is part of that. And I don't mean leverage cheap. I mean really connecting genuinely. You want to say more about that, Evan?
No, I think that's why one of the reasons why I thought this group was a really interesting mixture is like, I'm familiar with the CUNY context as a New Yorker, but I think it's really interesting to see the diversity of where are the leverage points or the champions internally, who are the teams that help make these things possible. So in certain cases at GMU, I think, Ben, your example I think is great, where you have a large and growing institution. I actually didn't even know that it was a public institution, which has, on the one hand, as you alluded to right at the end, a sort of Koch brothers, domain of influence, and also your work in the same institution happening. And so the complexity of that, I think, is really is challenging, but also shows that there's fissures and fractures and inconsistencies in these places. And then, of course, the role of OSUN as a global network, which I think, Jordan, that you alluded to, that maybe many people aren't actually that familiar with, despite it being a global network. Its US base is actually pretty slim. So I think that there's just some interesting ways in which there's like a couple of places, and like, some people think, oh, you just need the university president to get on board. At CUNY, that's not only is it not really an option, it's like sort of beside the point, is like, you don't need to go up that high. So, but like, where do you need to get in order to get leverage and opportunity? And at different institutions, that looks different, which is why I kind of liked this amalgamation of different sites to see like who are the types of people that you need to get backing for these kinds of things. Oh, Ben, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, no, I'll jump in on that. I'm thinking about lessons from our experience at Mason that may be useful in other cases. And in some ways, we do have a similarity with your experience at CUNY, in that this is a large institution and we didn't really ask for permission from anybody. We just started building it, and we've been building relationships and capacity. And it's an organizing process. I still have an organizer's mentality, and so as that's happening, people are paying attention, and we're able to reach out beyond the social sciences and humanities and public policy into business and computer science and environmental science and other fields, as we've been working to do that. So there's that, and I think institutions that are frankly public and are newer tend to be institutions that are more accessible for that kind of work. There's just not a lot of territoriality here. In fact, there's almost none. Nobody is saying you're on our turf. You're doing something that we're already doing. We don't have that problem. So that presents an opportunity. The other thing I'll say is that it's not just that there are sort of there's fissures or disjunctures here at Mason. It's that there was actually a struggle at George Mason University. And the reason why any of us from outside of Virginia knew about George Mason University, it should be said, is not because of investigative journalists or people from the outside writing books. It's because students and alum and faculty and staff fought back. And I didn't really fully understand that until I got here. My position came about because of an internal struggle within my department over Koch brothers funding. The department voted to disaffiliate from a center that did solicit money from the Koch brothers that works on immigration research, actually does great work. But we disaffiliated, and we broke, this is before I got here, we broke our Center for Social Science Research off from that and recommitted to public sociology through that process. And it was our primarily graduate students who put themselves on the line with some faculty backing. who made that happen. This county, I'm from Madison, it's a very left-wing city, right? I mean, the Green Party and the Democrats are, the Greens have had, control of the city council at various points and so on. But Fairfax County is even more left-leaning in terms of the electorate. We draw from Northern Virginia, although increasingly internationally too, as the stature of the university goes up, but we still draw from this region. We are majority, not just in sociology, but for the entire university, majority first-generation college students, majority first-generation Americans, mostly who come from Northern Virginia. And so that is who Mason really is. So I guess what's the lesson here? It's that, from conflict, from struggle, you will emerge the alternatives, right? And so that's what we are doing. We're actually helping to move forward something that was already in process here at Mason. And it is a problem. I'm a former attorney, and I would love to have a relationship with a law school, but it's a problem that we can't really talk to the law school here. We can't talk to economics very well. But as for the rest of the university, we've got plenty of room to play in. And there's lots of people in the community who want to work with us.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Ben. Jordan, I'm curious too, like from the BARD perspective, like what role or connection EDI has, because OSUN is this global thing, like within the BARD is also a small liberal arts college, but has quite a few, centers and locations, geographies itself has a footprint. I'm curious, like what is the relationship internally in BARD to this program and like the involvement of the administration in this? I know you're not the lead on all of the development work, but I'm curious of like how supportive or neutral or kind of involved or not the BARD was in this work.
Yeah, I can say a few things about that for sure. Yeah, I came on as a research scholar, so that my position is certainly not one of too much insight into administration. So that's the caveat. I'll also say that even within BARD, some people don't know about OSUN, right? So even in BARD Annandale, some people don't know. Some folks don't know about this, especially students. So it is still like a lot of organizing work to do. It is still a lot of like direction, right, that needs to be found for a lot of the work. And yes, BARD has early colleges all across the eastern United States and in New Orleans. We have a handful of outposts and then long-term partners like Central European University, where it's been difficult to do this work. And for similar reasons to what Ben was mentioning about George Mason's econ department. What we've been doing to try to broaden this even to because there's, Wits Watersrand, if I could say that correctly, but University of Wits in South Africa has actually an incredible economics department, very, very pluralist, very interesting. That's probably the only quote unquote unorthodox heterodox program within the network. So it's been, it's again, I emphasized interdisciplinarity a couple of times. That's genuinely how we're making it happen, is through leaning on the relationships that are already established through the Center for Civic Engagement that have been doing a lot of either a kind of like civic projects that aren't research, from supporting education in Afghanistan of women through a feminist perspective to different aspects of a liberal arts education, writing and thinking in different ways. And in any sense, also the fact of the matter is that OSUN at BARD is actually run by a lot of the BARD administrators, which makes, I think, a lot of things quick, right, and possible, and we can experiment, right? I think so in a lot of ways, we are in a different position than the other two programs, in that there is a fair amount of funding and there is a fair amount of decision-making power within the institution itself that is also shared with BARD. So if you have any other questions, I'm happy to go say more, but that's the general overview, I think, to get to your point.
Yeah, other questions from folks here?
I just would add something that I think you brought up much earlier in your pathways slides, Evan. What I say is there's no wrong door to teach and learn this stuff. So, this is a lot, this is a panel of people who are doing it in higher ed. And I feel like that's just got to be a sliver of what we as a movement do. And I think we agree. You know, I have the expression, everything you needed to know you learned in kindergarten. It's not my expression, it is one. And what you learned in kindergarten was cooperation. And yeah, I say it then gets beaten out of you in the rest of your schooling because you've got to compete and compete. But I want to shout out to that fact, because there's not a wrong way. And if people think, oh, that's not available to me, we have to make sure that there's other things that are. And that's, you know, so, you know, the professional development way that EDI does it, the idea of de novo going out into the community, like all of this is like us figuring out other ways to bring education. And absolutely, like, we should be, it's so interdisciplinary, we should be everywhere teaching it in all kinds of ways. You know, it being justice and cooperation and democracy.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that's part of right, and that's part of why the idea of the bringing of different types of programs together too, is that one of the things is when you're looking for visibility and trying to make the case, the more different avenues you try to insert yourself through brings your approach, your ideas, your connections, your opportunities to different audiences who, you know, I think that's one of the reasons why having a student, you know, voice included here is one of the things that I think, you know, I heard a lot from you, Rebecca, especially within a CUNY environment, particularly, was the mandate around, you know, who's the audience, or who is going to take these classes. You have to demonstrate interest. You have to demonstrate, you know, it's like it's like Kickstarter, right? You have to show demand for the thing before the thing exists. And I think that thinking for me keyed me into like, you know, how do we make the case? Because you have, like, if it's not known, there's a chicken and egg issue going on. If it's not known, how do people find it? If you don't have it, you know, advocates and ambassadors from among the student body and student population, how do you communicate to other students about what's possible? And so that's been the sort of thinking of like, how do you connect it into existing narratives or existing universes of like what is interesting and what's capturing student interest, which is always like, you know, even from the name of your class, right? You can see, I've seen this like major, you know, like huge differences in how you talk about the title of your course in any given semester, which can, you know, shape how many students sign up for it, that kind of thing. Other questions from folks?
I just want to speak to something I put in the chat. You know, just in terms of strategies, one thing that I was able to do because of my past history was I was able to raise money when I got here. And so that may or may not, but it may be something that can be done in some other cases. So by bringing in, it was $250,000 to get off the ground. So bringing in that money then, you know, may have helped me to avoid challenges from administrators, because I'm doing what they're always telling us to do, and something that's quite rare for sociology to be able to do. And then the college has gotten our backs, and they've been helping us out in various ways. So it's not comparable to Bard and OSIN, but it is you know, if you can find a way to bring in some extra money, then I think that gives you some leverage internally. At least that was our theory. And I have a question, actually. You know, we're a bit different than I think some of these other programs, because we are not exclusively focused on economic democracy. When, you know, our work has really been you know, trying to bring together various streams, you know, the Alternatives to Capitalism Network and the Solidarity Economy scholars and legal scholars studying constitutional change and revolutionary constitutionalism and so on. So I'm curious about, for those who are, you know, focused with more sort of intensity on economic institutions and on economic democracy as a frame, how do you think about sort of other kinds of system change initiatives? How do you relate to, you know, the transition movement and so on? And that's something, yeah, I'm just interested in that question, making those bridges. And we can address other questions too, if others have others they want to put forward too.
Maybe Laura's coming on.
Abolitionist studies, that's another one.
I'm sorry, my camera seems not to be working, but I'm part of CUNY as well. I have done some work with Rebecca, and I teach at Hunter College in the Urban Policy and Planning program, and I teach economic development, but perhaps unusually for someone who teaches economic development, I emphasize a lot. I emphasize degrowth a lot, and I feel like that's one of those next systems movement, the idea that we don't necessarily, in order to prosper, we don't necessarily have to consume ever more and earn ever more and have ever greater economic returns. So I didn't really, that was just kind of something that came to me in response to what you were saying. And I think but sometimes it can be hard, particularly because, and Rebecca was making the point that union labor people are sometimes a little bit unfriendly to the idea of cooperatives. They're probably even more unfriendly to the idea of degrowth. So, there can be some kind of points of collision there.
Yeah, I think it's a big question you have there, Ben, because I feel like it's also intersectional that, back to there's no wrong door, but I daily reflect on this, that, if everybody lived like we do in America, we would need 5 planets, as the wrong way to think about success, right? More money for what? I mean, and people need to make the rent and pay what they have to pay. And it just, we're really locked into a system that's going to take a lot of struggle and change. And this is why I really think it's so interdisciplinary that wherever people find themselves with interest is where they can find some way to think about a more just way for our economic system to function. And even the word economics, it doesn't ring for a whole lot of people because of, the dominant, way economics is framed. And I listen to NPR often, and there's always the, who's in the money. They've got this whole thing about stocks as if we're all supposed to be following the stock market. Well, if they say so, we do. What a shame is that? So I'm not sure how we get to the degrowth model and the transition towns, but I do think a lot of it comes out of struggle. A lot of it comes when things are at their worst, people show their best, and we got to honor that in the face of what is going to be faced in this, coming system.
I'm sort of tempted to leave it with those comments. I think, to your question, Ben, I also think that, like, because I've been in for the longest time, or not longest, for 10 years or so, let's say, there's been, in the United States, there's the UN framing of social solidarity economy. There's a global thing around next systems. There's, the numerous different sort of like schools of thought and conceptual frames. And for the case of, in this case, economic democracy, also just another sort of generic one, democracy, collaborative, and community wealth building. I think the idea is that and I think your work with next systems thinking is a good one, which is to try to think of them as a container that has, or a permeable or a porous container, right? That there's some amount of boundaries and separations, but also quite a bit of interchange and interconnection. And that speaks to interdisciplinarity that Rebecca's referring to, which is how do you help people understand a landscape of thinking and their relationships to one another? Abolitionist tradition has a distinctly North American characteristic to it in terms of its theory and practice compared to social solidarity economy. And yet social solidarity economy has gotten, has taken some root in the last, 10, 15 years as well. And so, yeah, I think, for us, and certainly in framing this webinar, economic democracy, we were making no effort to like exclude, but rather to just, we just pick one phrase and say, hey, this is the one we'll use, and it's the one BCDI uses most frequently. And so, but I think from an academic or from a research perspective, that's another thing that speaks very concretely, I think, to the way of connecting to student interest and visibility among the community and student populations of what are the salient themes that draw people in to it being relevant to their lives, right? If you're looking for something, like I think Leslie's point was really great. Like if you're seeking something that you're not finding, how do you find something that you're seeking? And what are the themes or the buzzwords, the conceptual hooks that are going to get you there? So yeah, that's, if there aren't any other questions, I'm happy to leave it there. I appreciate a lot of the time that folks have spent. We'll obviously keep the recording and send it out to everyone, and put it up on YouTube like the last one, and we'll send out the link to the first webinar as well when we update everybody. But yeah, if other than that, I think we can call it a day, call it an afternoon. Thank you everybody so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you. This is really valuable. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Nice to see everybody.
And
Thanks so much.
yeah, we'll be in touch.
Bye.